Thank you for coming. We welcome you to our panel tonight on faith and climate. We'll be exploring climate issues from an LDS perspective with a few local experts. So I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Brigham Young. I am the Sustainability Director here at BYU. We have a new sustainability office. It's an exciting time for us. We're doing our long-term planning for the university. Many universities have had, such as the University of Utah, have had sustainability programs, robust, active, really having an impact for the last decade or so. What's exciting about being here in Utah Valley is BYU is doing its planning at the same time as Provo City is doing its planning. And I see we have some Provo officials here with us tonight. Our neighbors at Utah Valley University, just up the road, are doing their strategic planning around sustainability, and the church as well, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is a sponsoring institution for Brigham Young University. So it's a great time to be here. We're excited and again, grateful to you all for being here. This event is being co-sponsored by 4 advocacy groups. I see many folks in the audience here representing them. We'll have many more watching online. I'd like to introduce those groups to you now. So the first is Mormon Women for Ethical Government. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to inspiring women of faith to be ambassadors of peace, transcend partisanship, and courageously advocate for ethical government. MWAG is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We do, however, fully sustain the leaders and doctrines of the church. The next organization is LDS Earth Stewardship. It's a nonprofit organization united by the belief that Earth stewardship is a gospel principle and gathered for the purpose of exploring and promoting that principle. So you're probably noticing a theme here. The next group is Citizens Climate Lobby and its nonprofit arm, Citizens Climate Education, is a nonpartisan organization focused on creating the political will to address climate change. The LDS Action Team is one of 12 faith groups which have action teams with CCL, inviting members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to join us to become better stewards of God's creation for our children and for generations to come. And the final group is Mormon Environmental Stewardship Alliance, or MESA. This nonprofit organization is not an official website or organization affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but it is a community of Latter-day Saints, friends, and supporters who find faith-affirming work in caring and advocating for God's creation and acting as grateful beneficiaries and wise stewards of the earth to further his eternal purposes and instruction to care for all living things. So these 4 groups and we here at BYU have decided to share with you a quote from President Russell M. Nelson, who is now the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This quote was given about 2 decades ago in a general conference when he was a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And in a talk on the creation, he said this: "As beneficiaries of the divine creation, what shall we do? We should care for the earth, be wise stewards over it, and preserve it for future generations. And we are to love and care for one another." So tonight we come to talk about these 2 important topics, faith and science, and in the context of climate change and all that is happening around the world. These 2 powerful forces are a significant part of the lives of scientists who are also members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So we're very interested in hearing from our panelists tonight their thoughts on these topics. If I could just quickly introduce them. Jani Radenburg on our left is a planetary scientist studying planets and moons throughout the solar system. She has worked with NASA spacecraft missions, including the Cassini mission to Saturn's moon Titan, and the upcoming Dragonfly mission that will return to Titan and put a rotorcraft lander on the surface. Her research takes her around the globe and throughout the remote corners of Utah. She is a respected researcher and teacher in, this is going to test my pronunciation, volcanology and geomorphology. Did I say those right? Great. Thank you for being here. We'd also like to welcome Douglas Kip Soloman, or Kip, from the University of Utah. He's a professor of geology and geophysics. Kip is the former chair of his department and teaches courses in groundwater hydrology, environmental geology, and general geology. And this year he was the winner, once again, of his department's Outstanding Faculty Research Award. He is a dedicated scholar and teacher known for his excellent teaching, impactful research, and mentorship of the next generation of scholars. I wanted to memorize all of that, but I knew I would botch it up. So I'm reading from my screen. Thank you so much for being here. And finally, I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator, Isabella Arrigo. Isabella is a Chicago native who is currently a master's student in environmental science and sustainability here at BYU. As an undergraduate, she led a pioneering study on the human health and economic costs of air pollution. And as a graduate student, she is studying the effects of wildfire on aquatic ecosystems. Her diverse work has taken her everywhere from testifying at the UN to measuring water quality in underserved communities in Ecuador. And I'd like to say one final thing about Isabella. She's also a film star featured in our brand new BYU sustainability video, which you can find on our website, sustainability.byu.edu. She appears no fewer than 3 times, taking care of 3 different plants and showing off her green thumbs. So I'm going to hand the microphone to Isabella, who'll be the moderator for tonight's conversation. And towards the end, we'll invite you to join us with questions. Thanks so much. Let's give them a round of applause. Thanks for coming.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. But just to kind of start off, I know something that I still struggle with, and that I know a lot of kind of non-science people struggle with, is the scientific process. And so I'm wondering if you two as scientists could just kind of walk us briefly through what you go through as a scientist. And
okay. I guess I would say, I'll start with an example. We get images back from spacecraft. This is maybe a really simple field in many ways, planetary science, because you're looking at a landscape for the first time and trying to understand what's happening. And I think anyone can get involved in this process. It's pretty exciting. So an image comes back from Titan, from Cassini, and I remember being in the room when this happened in 2004. And we saw this picture that was these long, dark lines of kind of just a radar dark stripes across the surface. And I had no idea what they were. It's like, what in the world could those be? We called them cat scratches. So that's maybe the first thing you do. You just describe cat scratch. And we have a lot of names like that in planetary because we're trying to understand what they are. And then someone in the room who had Earth experience said, those look like large dunes like you find in the Sahara. And sand dunes, how could you have sand dunes on Titan? There's this really distant moon. It does have a thick atmosphere. We expected there just to be lakes and seas of methane all across the surface. It's that cold that there should just be methane there. And we found those eventually at the poles, but the first pictures had nothing like that. And just these long, dark stripes. And so then you said about, okay, well, how big are they? And what do they do in relation to other landforms like mountains that we might see on the surface? And then you correlate that with something that you're familiar with. So you look on Earth and say, these features indeed look exactly like the sand dunes of the Sahara. They're the same size. They behave around obstacles the same way. They must be sand dunes. But then how could they be sand dunes? What could they be made of? What sand would be at Titan? And in some ways, then you go back to your models. Well, we shouldn't have sand there. But well, maybe the sand is a different kind of sand. And it turns out, yeah, it is different. It's organic materials. It's not made of life, but something that could be made, that could actually make up life. It's just organic materials from processes in the atmosphere. Organic sands on the surface making giant sand dunes. And then we can use the ones on Titan to help us better understand the Earth and our models for how they might form on the Earth, which are still under work. And so you just kind of do this big feedback, like, well, the Titan dunes are doing this, and we didn't know that because we've only been looking at Earth dunes. And you just revise, and you keep coming to new conclusions about the wind and the sand and the properties, and that's ongoing.
Yeah, I have a kind of a similar thought. We're driven by curiosity. We're driven by things we don't understand. And those can come from really simple observations. We can pick up a rock and we can look at it, maybe look at it under a hand lens and say, why are these minerals here and not over there? Or it can be a little bit larger. We can say, why do we have mountains out there and we don't right here? And then we can sort of look, in our past, and we can look through the literature and look for explanations that might only partially satisfy us. We keep searching. In particular, I study groundwater systems, and part of my motivation there comes from asking myself, I teach a class called The Water Planet. And one of the questions I pose to the students right at the start of the class is, do we have enough water circulating in our hydrosphere to feed, well, we're at what, 7.9 billion people right now? So 8 billion, what about 9 billion? What about 10? So how many people can we feed on this earth? And it turns out that the answer to that partly comes down to groundwater systems. And so we start to explore, well, what do we know about the volume of groundwater on Earth? What do we know about how fast it recharges? And then all of a sudden we start finding out that some of the big reservoirs of groundwater on Earth have actually been underground for hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, even millions of years in some cases. I've worked on an aquifer in Australia known as the Great Artesian Basin. And so we then start to ask ourselves, can these reservoirs actually sustain us into the next generations? And then our science goes from there.
Thank you. I guess, as you said, as scientists, you're driven by curiosity. You're always trying to find new answers to new questions that you're coming up with, because the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. I go learning as I go through school. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit too, as you're answering questions and your new data that you're coming up with, sometimes the answers that you're getting conflict with past answers that you found. And I'm wondering how do you address those conflicting numbers or answers and deal with that?
Well, one of the strengths of science is that we're always changing our minds. Maybe I put that a little bit differently. A good scientific study embraces the uncertainty. I'll give you a really simple example. Not long ago, I needed a new crown. And, the dentist cut off my old tooth. And then he took this fancy laser thing and imaged the little stub there so that then a crown could be made for this. Knowing a little bit about that whole process, I could say to myself, there's uncertainty in the machine that's, going to make this. It's not going to make a perfect cast. And so I have a decision to make. Am I going to actually, accept this crown? So what I do is I kind of look at the tolerances. I look at the uncertainty that's associated with that. And I realize that, this machine can't make something to plus or minus a nanometer. Maybe not even a micrometer, but it can certainly make something to plus or minus a millimeter. And then I say they can put some glue in there. And so I arrive at a conclusion that although they can't make this perfectly, they can make it good enough. And what's important is that they're able to tell me the plus or minus. They're able to give me the uncertainty, which lets me make a rational decision about, should I just walk around? And in my case, it would not have made sense to walk around with a hole in my tooth and in pain and that, because they can't make a crown to plus or minus a nanometer. Well, I don't need a crown to that kind of precision. So yeah, there's uncertainty in everything we do, and there's ebbs and flows, and it's part of the whole process. But when we quantify the uncertainties, and I would encourage you, as you read literature, to look for the plus and minus. In the most recent report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, one of their conclusions talks about a 95% chance that global warming is the result of human activities. That's an indication that they've evaluated this plus and minus. And then it allows us to decide, is that something we should pay attention to? If you told me I had a 95% chance of having a wreck on the freeway as I drive back to Salt Lake tonight, I'm walking home, you know. On the other hand, if I only have a 0.001% chance, I'm probably just gonna drive home. So it's quantifying that and recognizing that we never know the answer perfectly. And therefore, we're always going to change our minds to some extent.
I really like that idea of good enough. I think we all hope that our ideas will be superseded by a new idea. We usually hope it's our own. We get to say, oh, you know, I was wrong back. In fact, I went to a talk at a big conference and all of a sudden the room just filled. And then this man stood up and he said, I was wrong when I stated my big model 30 years ago, and I've been pounding it on, you know, into everybody for the last 30 years. I was wrong. And then everybody just like listened, and then they got up and left. They wanted to hear that. Like, okay, you know, if someone can admit I was wrong, and we can go on to the next new thing. And I think, but I think it's important that there are some big strides that get made. And I think these things that the IPCC has been doing have been big strides, and that we've been reaching these sort of 95% numbers after lots and lots of work, and that there may be kind of smallish tweaks in the coming years, but maybe not massive in terms of our understanding. There was just recently a Nobel Prize in physics that actually recognized the work, the foundational work of climate change from starting in the 70s. It's the first time they've even looked at atmospheric physics or any kind of atmosphere processes for a Nobel Prize. So that's really great. We're kind of looking at these things and saying, look, these are important, these are valuable.
Thank you. I guess moving on with this idea of uncertainty and misunderstanding science, what would you say are the most misunderstood things about what we can do to make a difference in terms of this climate crisis? What do people think about it that we can do, or what we can't do? What will be effective, what won't be, and what do you guys think the science is saying?
I feel like we may, first of all, be overwhelmed by the big numbers and the things just saying, hey, well, here it comes, like it's just barreling down the highway. And so what can we even do? We just need to get out of the way, or what should we do? But then we also hear about, well, wait a minute, there are some things we can do that maybe we didn't see before. I'm just hearing about these ideas of sequestering carbon into soils, which happens naturally, but maybe we can actively do that. There's this fun new documentary, Kiss the Dirt, Kiss the Ground, something like that anyway, that has this idea of all we do is make some tweaks to farming practices. And if we do that on a large scale, that might help us slow things in one arena, slow our putting of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in one arena. We're smart, we'll figure some things out. And then I think for us personally, we can definitely do things on a local scale. We can look at, like I see these signs by the elementary school, no idling. I never saw that 5 years ago, no idling, because they're worried about air quality for their kids and themselves. And they also are aware, well, this extends to our whole neighborhood and to our whole valley and to our whole, this is a big concern in the Wasatch Front. And it's air quality, but it extends to climate. So that's a little local change we can do that makes things better on the whole.
Yeah, I mean, Apple figured out some time ago, right, that they could make a fortune by charging 99 cents for a song, right? It's this concept that a little effort spread out over billions of people. And in fact, you know, the issues associated with climate change are no different from that. Individually, you know, I drove down here. I have a carbon footprint from having done that. That's a relatively small footprint over the whole thing, but you know, when you start multiplying that by 7 or 8 billion, that's the issue. So that's the issue, and it's also the solution.
So I guess what you just said about this, if a lot of us make little differences, right? And it makes me think about all the power that the church has in having and encouraging a lot of people to make small differences to really bring big things to pass, right? And so I'm wondering, so something that I've been thinking a lot about, and kind of one of the big purposes of this event just is about how we connect our faith to environmental issues. And where do you see the most room for the church to be able to connect doctrine to environmental issues, or talk more about that, whether it be in classes or leaders mentioning it more? I don't know.
Well, we actually are in a unique position to influence the world. And in part, we have that position because we understand that all the world is our brothers and sisters. We understand that people that live on the Bengal Plain need to grow some food. They need, the average elevation, I think, of Bangladesh is only like 15 meters above sea level. And when we look at global sea level rise and we say, where are all these people going to go? And how are they going to feed themselves? And we're in a unique position to care about that, because they're not just some people out there, they're children of God. And so the biggest thing I think we can do is start to raise awareness. We haven't, I don't think, in the past tended to think as much about the global environment and how it's going to affect our brothers and sisters around the world. We're lucky. Although we have lots of poverty, Lorel and I have served for many years in the inner city mission in Salt Lake. And amongst wealth, we have massive poverty still. But as a nation, we're wealthy. And we probably have the ability to, in part, engineer some solutions, but those solutions aren't available generally to the world. So we need to understand and take our desire to help humankind and put that into action, whether it be individual things that we do here, or whether it be that we decide to pursue an advanced degree in environmental science, so that we can, start to propose solutions that no one has yet thought about.
Yeah, I think, Isabel, as you're probably aware, having been at the UN, it helps to have a global perspective, and that regularly nations like Kiribati are at the UN saying we are underwater already. They're at sea level, and so they're extremely vulnerable, and they raise that alarm every chance they get. There are other communities, the northern native populations, that are extremely vulnerable right now because of melting permafrost and things like that. And so, right, these things that we can do to help ourselves here are not going to help the global populations. And if we're willing to, first of all, I think travel, I would say travel is really important. I'm a huge fan of travel, and it gives you perspective. It helps you get to know and love all of your sisters and brothers who live across the world in different places and different conditions. And you especially will see more poverty than you live in if you travel. And then there are some statements by our church leaders. I loved that first one by President Nelson. It's read at the beginning. And also Elder Oaks in 2017 at a BYU Hawaii graduation mentioned that climate change adversely affects the poor. And so it is our responsibility from the position of helping each other to consider that in the way we are using resources or involved in whatever aspect of climate change that we're involved in.
So, I mean, you just talked a lot about how this adversely affects poor communities, how, I mean, it affects humans, our brothers and sisters, these climate issues. It's not just about this, it's not just about the plants and the trees and the animals, right? And I guess, what would you say is our moral obligation as members of the church to care about this crisis?
I think that we need to look deep in ourselves for what we feel we can do. And what I do find that it's being an earth scientist, a geologist, and I didn't gravitate toward biology or, sort of humanities. I mean, I did a little bit, but okay, I love rocks and dirt and the earth. And, and so I love to even just think of it from an earth perspective. And as I was kind of looking through some scriptures today, a couple of things occurred to me, and that was the word replenish. And know that we think about that word mostly as we're considering, multiply and replenish. So it's probably bringing children to the earth. But what if we think about it in a different way, and we replenish because we feel it's the right thing to do, and that's told to us in Scripture. There was a talk actually at last conference, Elder Gilbert, and he quoted Rex Lee, who was former president of BYU, and he said there's all of us have drunk from a well we did not dig or sat by a fire that we did not light. And then he went on to say that it's if we don't, reseed those fields that somebody else planted, then in effect, it's like returning without using all the talents, right? So that's another interesting kind of scriptural way to think of it.
Yeah, Spencer W. Kimball, many of you probably recall that he would frequently say, make no small plans, they have no magic to stir men's souls. We don't have magic to solve the climate problem. And we have to make big plans to do that. There's a graphic that I really love, and maybe you can follow my hands and think about this. If we were to make a plot of, on the y-axis here, of some index of the quality of life, it would include infant mortality rates, mean annual incomes and things like that. So a quality of life index. And then here would be our energy consumption on the x-axis, okay? Then you go around the world and you gather data from countries, rich and poor and big and small, and you plot these up, and the curve is interesting. It goes up quite quickly, and then it starts to flatten, and then it flattens, and it really flattens, and it goes way, way over here. And you'll be happy to know that we're actually not at the very end of that curve. It happens to be where I did my PhD, our friends to the north in Canada. But we're not very far away from that. The reason I love this curve is that it to the extent that, this makes sense, and I think it does, we could actually cut our energy consumption in half, and we wouldn't drop on that quality of life curve hardly at all. And so I have to say to myself, if I can do that, and if that will make a difference to, I've done a lot of expert missions for the United Nations. So I've been to the Philippines, and we try to solve some of their water problems. And I think if I can, and to Mongolia, if I can just, maybe drive a little bit smaller vehicle, maybe I'll work from home a little bit more. Maybe I'll ride my bike to the university. I'm fortunate enough I can do that. I'll do these things, and if we could collectively move ourselves down that curve, we literally in the United States could cut our energy consumption and not really affect our quality of life. And therefore, I think we should do it.
And I feel like we can ask, we can even ask as a community how to do that, because you may be asking, oh man, how can I turn the computer off? But there are probably little things drawing power that we don't realize because we're just not thinking about that as a solution. But if we were to do that as a community, and or incentivize, rather than incentivize, power companies to make more money, it might be incentivize. How can we incentivize as a government there to be less power use? And so then let's all take a careful look at how power is being used. I bet we wouldn't even notice those changes that we need to make to bring ourselves back. As you say, it doesn't affect quality of life. But we have to demand it as the public, right?
I think about that a lot. Sometimes if I'm in the Kennedy Center late at night and all their lights are just manual ones and they're all on all night long and nobody's in there. And so I'll try to turn them off as I leave, but I don't know. Even just on campus, right? There's so much that we could do, but as an entire community, as an entire church community, there's so much we could do. So I guess I wonder for you two personally, what are some doctrines that as I said before, we don't really talk about these environmental doctrines that we have in the church, but they exist, abundantly, there's a lot of them. And so I wonder if you two personally have doctrines that you really connect with or really try to live by that you found in the church that connect your faith and your love of dirt and rocks or the planet as a whole.
For me, it comes back to some of the things I've already said. It comes back to people. we know from the scriptures that we're to have dominion over this earth, but that doesn't mean that that we, that we use this in a way that is simply for our pleasure. It means that we care for it. And the reason that we care for it is that it's the spaceship that's got to house all of these people. We know that that we need to multiply and replenish the earth. But ultimately, it's the number of people that we are trying to support on this planet that is a major environmental issue. And all of those people would like to move up that curve that I described. They want to move up there, and why shouldn't they? They all want to be, they all want to have a vehicle. They all want, the comforts that we're actually able to enjoy here. So to me, it comes back, this idea of dominion comes back to us saying, let's use this earth for us, but sparingly. Let's use it in a way that will make it sustainable for the next generation and the generation after that.
I really, as a planetary scientist or and by relationship astronomer, we really love the Abraham and Moses scriptures. These are ours alone, right? Only our faith has these, and there's so much in there about the creation. And this extends even beyond our own creation. It talks about worlds without number have I created, and even discusses there are many that have passed away. There are many more that are in existence, but you can't even number them. And to just have our minds opened like that and think about this giant universe, and that our Heavenly Father cared enough to put that into scripture so that we can know about that and remember that. And then to carefully tell a creation story that details all of the kind of elements that come together to make a planet, the materials, the light, the water, and then the biology as it starts coming in, and just thinking about that whole process. And that's retold in, for us, 3 different places, 4 maybe in the Book of Mormon as well. So this is important, and I think provides that foundation that we can use to kind of grow our understanding of placement in the universe. We're mortals living on Earth right now, and this is all we know. We're not leaving Earth very easily anytime soon. Maybe we'll be able to live on Mars, some people, but or the moon. But anyway, that's still close enough to Earth that it's Earth, right? And we came from Earth, and so it for me, it makes it very special and very unique, especially as you look at all the places where it can't work. It works here, and we're told that scientifically, and also told that scripturally, and it's important to know that.
How does that knowledge affect both your relationship with your heavenly parents, but also your relationship with your science and what you do?
I mean, I feel like there was another scripture I found in Moses that I loved, where it said, and the earth wept. And then someone, it might have been Enoch, I forget, was saying, oh, look at the poor earth. Can't we find some, refuge for the earth? Can't we comfort her? And it was referencing the sins of the people, but to personify the earth in scripture like that, I thought was really moving. And again, all those things just make me understand that our heavenly parents love the earth and want us to love it back as well.
One of the things I've noticed increasingly in the last 15 years or so is that students that I interact most with, some of them are losing hope. They listen to climate scientists, and we tend to, and we have in the past, we've tend to sort of try to emphasize what the problem is. And we've had very little, we don't talk as much about potential solutions. Maybe that's logical when you can relate to Abinadi, right? I mean, when no one's listening to you, you tend to preach hellfire and damnation, and you don't preach joy and love and hope and faith and all of these uplifting parts, because no one's listening to you. So that's been a little bit the position that we've been in for a long time, but not anymore, really. And we, to the extent that we can take our faith and this is what helps me. I know that as difficult as these problems are, and I don't want to diminish it. I mean, this is the grand challenge, the grand scientific challenge of your generation and the next. There are major issues, but at the same time, my faith tells me that, there is a plan. It's not one that allows me to just do nothing. I mean, we're a missionary church, right? We could all take the attitude that if the Lord wanted to convert people, he'd just go do it. Why does he need us to send an angel someplace? Or, this doesn't work that way, and neither will solving the climate problems. We got to dig in. We got to do everything that we can, but we got to do it with hope and faith and a knowledge that there is a larger plan. This planet is going to receive its glory, and there will be a millennium. And it's our understanding of that should actually, we should lengthen our stride. We should really step it up to try to find solutions, not only in our personal habits, but we ought to be searching for things that we can do differently.
Thank you. I guess kind of maybe I'll take this as our last question, but I'm just for this part of the but I'm wondering, just off of that, what advice do you give to those students who are losing hope, or how can people of faith and people not of faith find hope in these scary circumstances that we're living?
Well, part of that comes through educating yourself. I really hope that, during your stay here at BYU or at the University of Utah or wherever you're at, that you'll take the time to try to improve your numeracy so that you can kind of evaluate for yourself numerically what sort of solutions we need to be thinking about, what things I should do that will really make a big difference, and things that maybe won't make such a big difference. I'll give you a really quick example. A few years ago at New Year's, when the air quality in Salt Lake was pretty bad, there was kind of a movement to cancel the New Year's fireworks. And so one of the questions I posed to my class is I said, let's compare the amount of carbon, the amount of PM2.5 and so forth that we're going to put into the atmosphere as a result of these fireworks. Let's compare that to the amount of carbon that we're going to just put out of our exhaust by driving to a New Year's celebration. And we did the calculation, and it's not a hard calculation. You don't actually have to be a planetary scientist to do this. You do have to have some skills. You have to be able to kind of mass balance and a little bit of chemistry, but not much. And you can make those sort of calculations, and you can realize that actually the fireworks was a tiny deal. Now, maybe there was a more symbolic reason to do that, but from a mass point of view, what we put out of our exhaust every day commuting vastly exceeded that. So finding the weightier matters of the law by not just what we read, but by what we can actually evaluate for ourselves. So learn, take some classes from Jani, take some classes in which, you hone your skills to be able to numerically evaluate arguments. I mean, you can put it out there on Facebook, of course, but learn that, obtain the skills to sort of arrive at a conclusion for yourself.
Yeah, I think your 20s are such a great time, but they're also a very difficult time because everything just seems to be so either really so good on the one hand or really so bad on the other, and it pulls you in lots of different directions, right? It's so difficult. Things feel almost, I don't want to say black and white. That's not exactly what I'm meaning here, but I remember riding in a van down to a field trip with some students 10 years ago, and they said, "Oh, Jani, it's so bad. What are we going to do?" And I noted that my own attitude was more calm and said, "It is bad. What are you going to do about it?" So putting it back on them, but also with a little bit more hopeful stance, like, well, look, there are some things we can do, and I think you can help figure it out. And now I look at them, and a couple of them are studying glaciers and glacial climatology and trying to help make strides in that area. Some others have started a geothermal energy company, trying to look for geothermal energy. This is really fantastic. And those are extreme examples of really jumping in and doing it. But by smaller or different amounts, you can all end up making a difference, whatever you choose to do.
And maybe I could just add, we are on the verge of a revolution. We're switching to electric cars. And I mean, that really is happening. That's going to demand some resources such as, lithium for our batteries that we haven't yet kind of fully realized. But we've figured out how to sequester carbon in the deep subsurface. We've made huge strides in how to do this. So we actually can build power plants, and we can probably even still power them with coal, or maybe better yet with natural gas, and we can capture that carbon at that point source and we can put it back in the ground. When you do the math, you realize that actually it's going to take a huge number of those, but it's a big part of the solution. I happen to be a proponent of nuclear power. We've made some major advances in being able to build smaller, safer nuclear reactors that have a tiny carbon footprint. So there are a lot of things, passive geothermal. We live in Salt Lake City, or in this, you don't, I do. The mean annual temperature here is really pretty nice. And conceptually, all we have to do is take the cold from the winter and use that in the summer, and take the hot from the summer and use it in the winter, and we'll just be fine, right? And that's really what a passive geothermal system does. We don't really have a need to use any fossil fuels to heat our homes and to modestly commute us around on lightweight vehicles and to light our houses. Wow, that's, and so much of this is new technology. We just have to avail ourselves of it.
And we have to demand it too,
yes,
as a public. I think, isn't there a fusion reactor being built in France? Fusion. They're hoping to break even. Okay, who would build a company where you break even? But if you can break even on fusion, wow, now you can make the little tweaks to start making money. That's huge. This is really amazing.
Cool, thank you. And I think with that, we'll open the floor to questions from our Zoom audience or from our in-person audience. So if you have questions in person, you can just raise your hand. And
before we take questions, let's give a round of applause to Jani, Kip, and Isabella. Thank you so much. We have about 50 people here in the room, downstairs and upstairs, about 100 online watching this over Zoom, and one very zealous vacuumer, if that's a word, outside. There's going to be a very clean hallway when we step out of this auditorium. So we've had 2 questions come in online so far. Let's start with one Zoom question, and then we'll go to the audience, and I can help you with the mic, whatever you want to do. So the first question comes from Dave Dixon. He says, in Doctrine and Covenants 104, it states that the earth has enough and to spare, but only insofar as we take of our abundance and impart our portion to the poor. You have spoken about how we can do that as individuals. Do you feel this injunction in section 104 should lead us as Latter-day Saints to work toward changing political and economic systems? If so, in what ways? So.
The short answer is yes, of course. I wish I knew how to influence politicians. It seems to be above my pay grade. We actually have to find ways to, in fact, depoliticize all of this, because it isn't political. It's physics. You know, and we also have to remember that we've known about the physics of climate change for a long, long time. Carbon dioxide was first actually identified, I think it was by Joseph Black, who actually identified carbon dioxide because of its heat retaining, its latent heat capability, and its as well as its heat capacity. That was in the 17th century. And, you know, and we know that CO2 as a greenhouse gas involves more than just its latent heat, but we've known about this for a long, long time. It's basic physics and chemistry. What we've got to do is find a way to make people understand this. And again, we have to find a way to make them realize that our actions here affect people halfway across, halfway around the world.
I really do love that scripture, the earth has enough and to spare. I know we can misapply it. Sometimes my brother will say, I'm not going to recycle, the earth has enough and to spare, so. But we can't, but you have to take the second half of that in there, as long as we're caring for each other and caring for the needy. And actually that connection is pretty dramatic in terms of thinking about climate. That, okay, there is enough, but if my usage continues where it is, then that's going to impact these people over here who are poor and who are going to be impacted by climate change. So, and I think there are a lot of principles in the gospel where if we apply them, we benefit in ways that we don't really understand what the direct connection is between those. But as long as we follow those principles, then we're rewarded. So maybe we haven't figured this out yet. Clearly, we haven't figured out how to help each other because there's not equality in the world. So.
Maybe if I could also just add, I think we tend to take that scripture and think of it in terms of, extracting something from the earth that we use. And we tend to think less about the things that we do and what those consequences are. So yeah, we probably never will run out of hydrocarbons. Every year when the new report comes out about the reserves, for the past 20 years or so, we've had 30 years of reserves out there. And every year we've got 30 years left. The reality is that it will just become too expensive to extract it from certain, reservoirs, but there's a massive amount out there. So yeah, there's plenty to spare, but we have to then think, we have to go beyond that and think about what happens when we use that and we put it into the atmosphere, that downstream consequence.
Any other questions from, here, go ahead in the middle. Yeah, for the people on Zoom, just in case. The question basically is if our panelists have any advice on discussing climate issues with our LDS friends and family, and how do you kind of bridge that gap and communicate those issues in a way that they care and want to make changes or don't just dismiss you?
I can try. I think one important thing is to remember that most of those things are cultural, and that they stem from a growing sort of conservatism in this region that also applies to the people in the faith, maybe because they're in the region, possibly because of other items related to those politics that pull them in that direction. And then there's a potpourri of, well, if I feel this way politically, then I also pull these other ideas politically. So there's a compartmentalization that didn't necessarily exist across the region and the faith, even maybe 30 years ago. Things were a little more spread out and they narrowed up. Maybe I'm wrong, and I don't want to generalize, which I'm doing. But how do you bridge that gap? I don't know. I think you are all much better at talking with each other about things than my generation was and Kip's generation was. You're so sympathetic and you listen and hear each other's opinions. So you're going to save the world in that way. really.
I don't have a magic silver bullet for this either, but my own experience has been, first of all, try not to be too confrontational. That usually doesn't help. You know, you ask yourself, what's my objective? Do I want to be right, or do I want to, do I want to win this argument, or do I want to change an opinion? Secondly, I would say, as a scientist, I'm moved by data. I'm not so moved by opinions. And so I tend to think about the global temperature curve, for example. I think about the quality of life, and energy curves. And so I pull them up and I say, well, here's the global temperature curve. How do you explain this? What if this isn't something that we should be concerned about, then why not? And then it leads to more of a discussion and saying, well, okay, who cares if the temperature goes up 1 degree? That's not a big deal. Well, what does that do to, 70% of the fresh water on Earth is in the cryosphere. It's frozen in, and you can't melt that without raising sea level. And if you raise sea level, Florida goes underwater. I mean, Miami Beach is struggling right now, and we're still way down on the curve. So it's a lack of knowledge. It's a lack of actually having ever really looked at data that leads to, it comes from opinions on social media that as opposed to hard data.
Something I'll just add to that is I really like to ask questions and try to get at kind of the heart, what he was saying, but I just really like to ask questions and figure out why it is they think the way they think, or why they really strongly disagree with science. Other questions? Oh, go ahead.
That's another fun one to do with evolution as well. Just keep asking questions back until you get to something.
So I'm going to combine a couple questions coming in from online. One question invited us to think about Sister Eubanks, some comments that she's made in recent firesides about why do we feel God in his creations and in our own creations? So thinking a little bit about how we can actually be inspired by the earth. And another question that's in a similar vein is that, and I'll read this, is from Madison Daniels. I think we're familiar with the injunction to use or draw upon our faith to address our climate crisis, as we've been talking about, but can it work the other way? We draw upon the earth to address our faith crises.
Every time I think about the extraordinary conditions that make life possible here on Earth, I'm blown away. That we're just, we're just the right size, that we have just enough gravity to hold on to oxygen, but we don't have so much gravity that we hold on to helium, which is produced, continuously in the Earth by decay of uranium and thorium. And if that weren't the case, and we're just perfect for that. And our whole atmosphere, we often tend to think about greenhouse warming in a really negative sense. Actually, we depend on greenhouse warming. The average temperature on the Earth would be something like -23 or 4 degrees Celsius if we didn't have greenhouse warming. We need some CO2 up there. We just can't have too much up there. So it's the balance that, and the fact that the oceans actually modulate this and they regulate this and they cycle and they fix carbon into rocks. And we got tons of them out here in our desert. We got lots of carbonate rocks. The functioning of the Earth is unbelievable in how it functions as a system. And that just gives me pause to say, this is amazing.
I think it's worth thinking about how do you feel when you're in nature, or where do you go to feel the presence of the Spirit and to feel the love of your Heavenly Father. And probably for a lot of you, it's out in nature somewhere, and you've got a favorite place, right? One of my favorite places is just the desert anywhere. And I've missed so much going out in the desert in the last couple of years. I've kind of, gone on little excursions because luckily we live very close to deserts. But finally, I got to kind of go on a far-flung trip way down to the Mojave and down to Southern California. And so, and thank you for the reminder I was going to look more carefully at Sister Eubank's works or her thoughts, and she just has a tremendous amount of really good ideas about this. But so as I was getting ready, I thought, okay, I need to look at some things in preparation for this. And instead, I found myself building an Instagram story about surfaces in the Mojave Desert. Here's a desert pavement, a bunch of rocks collected together. Here are some sand ripples. Here are some mud cracks. It's just this whole random walk through all of these things. And I thought at the end, oh man, I wasted my time. Oh no, it was my own version of sort of like a worship, that I'd noticed these things about the earth at my feet. And when I'm out just exploring those things, I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
I mean, pray for answers.
Yeah.
I don't, I have prayed for answers in my professional scientific life. And it's amazing the number of times when I'm taking my walk in nature, or maybe I'm just riding my bike into the university when it's quiet. And it really is personal revelation. When all of a sudden a new idea will come to me. And I think this happens to my colleagues as well. I don't think they recognize it in the same way that I do. But we should approach science problems the same way we do our theology. We should ask God.
Yeah, so I've actually even fasted for a spacecraft once. I was having some troubles, and it kept flying past Jupiter and getting zapped by all the radiation, and kept turning off just before it would look at Io, and it was horrible. It's just and I actually think I did fast. It didn't work out too well, but at the same time, it helped me feel a deep love for even just the machine itself, and just a gratitude for what it was bringing back to us. And that went a long way for me to involve, maybe that's one of those rare times where I do involve my faith in what I'm doing. Although same thing, I do try to pray all the time for inspiration in what I'm doing. And maybe, similar to how we pray for leaders in our church and elsewhere, we could pray for the scientists who are working on these problems, that they'll be inspired to hit on the right things, or pray for the leaders who are trying to come up with the solutions, or even the business people who should be investing in certain things, or whatever it is, because so that we as a whole community can solve this problem together. And again, if everything that we do in terms of our faith is with a reliance on the Lord, that it's the right thing for us, that will be the outcome, right? Normally we're praying for personal things, but whatever thy will be, I'll accept it. And we ought to take that as the same thing for our planet and the human family. And that's what helps give us hope, is that, we're trying all we can do, we hope, and help us know if we're not doing all we can do, but then we recognize it's all in your hands.
Thank you. And with that, I don't know, we'll call it a night.